For lesson 12, the rest of our sign rules for integers, and this is multiplying and dividing. So we have some brand new rules. Let's look at them. First, what you do is you perform the multiplication of the division problem, and then you count the number of negative signs that are in your problem. If you have an even number of negative signs, that's a positive answer. If you have an odd number of negatives, that's a negative answer. Let's look at some examples. Example 1 says negative 8 times negative 8. Well, I'm just going to do the multiplication. 8 times 8 is 64. Now, how many negatives did I have in my problem? 1, 2. That's an even number. Positive answer. A negative times a negative will always give me a positive. Example 2, 3 times negative 15. Well, 3 times 15 is 45. Is it positive or negative? I've only got one negative in my problem. That's an odd number of negatives. Therefore, my answer is negative. Example 3, before you even begin, you should be able to tell me, is it positive or negative? Well, there's only one negative in the problem. The answer is going to be negative. And then I don't have to worry too much. I can say 4 times 20. Well, that's 80. And example 4, negative 7 times 0. This would also be a negative answer except for the 0. We know when we multiply anything times 0, it is just 0, and 0 doesn't have a sign with it. Now let's look at number 5. I've got negative 2 times negative 3 times negative 1. Count the negatives because it's all multiplication. So I've got 3 negatives. I will have a negative answer. Now let's do the multiplication. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 1 is just 6. Example 6. I've got 3 times negative 5 times negative 4. 2 negatives is going to give me a positive answer. I don't really have to write that down. I just know it's positive. I could put it down and circle it. That way I would have my answer when I got to it. Now let's say 3 times 5 is 15. 15 times 4 is going to be 60. My answer is positive, and I don't have to write it if it's a positive sign. Example 7. Well, I look at this and I say, okay, count the negatives. There's 2 of them. It should be a positive answer, but wait. I'm going to be multiplying everything times 0. There's no reason to go to a lot of work if you're going to multiply the result by 0 because your answer will always be 0. So that saved us from having to multiply 4 times 20 times 92. Evaluate the following examples. In number 8, let's take a look at what happens when we have negative numbers and exponents. And this is a little bit tricky, so pay attention especially to example 8 and 9. If the negative is written out in front of a number with an exponent, it doesn't have anything to do with that exponent. In other words, this is really the same as negative 3 times 3. The only thing the exponent referred to is the number that's directly in front of it. Well, that means I have a negative times a positive. In other words, 1 negative. That would be a negative answer. My answer would be negative 9. Let's take a look at example 9. This time, the exponent is outside of parentheses and the negative is inside the parentheses. In other words, what they want me to do is multiply negative 3 twice. Negative 3 times negative 3. And a negative times a negative is going to give me a positive answer. An even number of negatives will always be positive. Let's look at example 10. See if you can do this before I do it. You can stop the tape anytime you want to work these problems. The way this is going to be written is negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. Why is the negative written 3 times? Because it's inside the parentheses and the exponent is outside the parentheses. Now, I know that's going to give me a negative answer because I have an odd number of negatives. 4 times 4 is 16. Times 4 again is 64. That's one of the perfect cubes that we'll need to memorize. Example number 11. Is negative 13 divided by 0? Well, first you're going to say division rules are exactly the same. So a negative, 1 negative would give me a negative answer. But hold on. 0 is the tricky one. Now I have to remember my rules for dividing by 0. Is this okay to do this or is it a no? Put an O beside the 0, wherever it is, and form the word either no or okay. And of course this one has to form a no. So the answer, since it is a no, we cannot do that, is this answer is what we call undefined. Example 12. I've got 1 negative. It's stuck out front of my fraction, which is really a division problem. But it doesn't matter where the negative is, whether it's out front or in the numerator or in the denominator. I still just have 1 negative. Odd number of negatives, negative answer. Now let's do the division. 72 divided by 8 is 9. So the answer is negative 9. Let's look at number 13. This time, they want me to take negative 1 and multiply it 32 times. So I'm going to be saying negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times 32 times. Now, I'm not going to write this out. All I have to do is look at that exponent and say even number of negatives, positive answer. Of course, as many times as you want to multiply 1 together, you're still just going to get 1. For 14 and 15, we're going to translate these, and then we're going to simplify them. 14 asks us to find the quotient. Well, that's division, and it should be written in the same order as the problem. And for quotients in algebra, we usually use fractions. So what I've got is negative 63 divided by a negative 3. 2 negatives, even number of negatives, is going to give me a positive answer. And then all I have to do is 63 divided by 3. Now, if you need to write that down, you do. And you do your division. And make sure that you're right. Since you do not have a calculator on this, it's better to be safe. The answer is 21. Now, 15, the sum, which means we add 5 plus negative 12 is what we're going to add. 5 plus negative 12 is the same as 5 minus 12. Opposite signs. Remember, this is not multiplication division. This one we're going back to the last lesson. This is adding and subtracting. What happens with opposite signs? We subtract and we keep the sign of the larger. So, with that last problem, you should remember the addition and subtraction rules with negatives are very different from the rules for multiplying and dividing with negatives. You need to get those straight in your head, do as many problems as it takes before you are really solid on this. This is a concept that you cannot go forward in algebra until you master.